Welcome, everybody. This is Doc G, and we have taken back our country with a lot of people today. We have our regulars, me, Scott Stepney, and also Kathy McGreevy. But we have some newcomers today. Who are they? Let us know,
We've
Scott.
got
Who's here?
David Malachar and Ethan Allen, and they're not really newcomers. They've been on before, but in different capacities.
Right.
Now we're about to talk about taking our country back by hopefully limiting lawyers' access and creating access to our courts through advocates. And we have some advocates on the line. The federal law allows for advocacy with regard to the representation of people with disabilities. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And state constitutional law and other laws may allow for advocacy with regard to spiritual matters and religious matters. In any event, we're going to start out the same way we always do by explaining why we are here. We are here to take our country back. And actually, in the more true form, as we've evolved over time on this show, Taking Our Country Back, we've kind of refined it to taking our local communities back. Community by community. And then networking communities to keep the power on the streets of the community. No more trickle down on high from the federal government and the state government. The idea, we think, but we're always wanting to debate, if anybody wants to debate, is to go to work in our local communities, boots on the ground, and get things done. Without further ado, I'm going to ask Kathy McGreevy to explain the difference between an empire or a republic and, this time, a community.
Oh, well, it would apply no matter how macro or micro you want to make it, but an empire is a nation or group of nations governed by a supreme imperial central authority that considers its people its subjects, whereas a republic is a nation or state or community in which the power for governance rests with the people, who then elect representatives from amongst themselves. And in a republic under the constitutional rule of law like we have here in this country, the Constitution, via the rule of law, protects the rights of minorities or even in just a single individual against the interests of the majority, or as I like to call it, mob rule. And when we talk about rights, the preservation and protection of rights to the rule of law, we talk about inherent rights, God-given rights, rights that are ours due to our humanity, not because government bestowed them or they are privileges granted. They are rights that we are given as part of creation. And that's an incredibly important distinction. We would have these rights whether government exists or not.
So, Kathy, we've talked a lot about how we achieve these rights and what we can best do, and you've always been a proponent of get involved in your local community.
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit about why you say get involved in your local community rather than run for state office or something, national office?
Well, because the people involved on the local level are accessible. They're our neighbors, our friends, our family. They're people we know. We can walk down the street to City Hall. We can walk up to the city administrator, or if you are the mayor, or however your governance works in your community, and knock on the door. And chances are very good that we will get an audience. We can sit and literally go to the council meetings. When public with business comes up, we can stand up and be heard. We can run for those offices. We can, in other words, they're all accessible. All of the people, the bureaucracy is accessible. Again, our neighbors, our friends, people we know, or people, it's 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. And when it's that close and it's that accessible, then it is representative, and you can be heard and you can create change. Right. And there's no other way to do it. Honestly, we were founded to do it this way. And the federal government becoming the great empire, the great overlord of the towns and the municipalities and the counties and the states is all backwards. This should not be happening. The federal government is an agency relationship to the states. And Scott does a really good job of explaining how all that came into being and why. And we've gotten so far afield from that. So the only way to really get this all back is to start locally.
I agree. And one of the ways of starting locally is in the court system. Because,
absolutely.
I read an interesting law review article, and it was that the way the federal government colonized the states was when they became territories, they'd put a federal court in there. And they were federal territorial courts. And, courts have been, from time immemorial, way of controlling the people, and actually the local way of doing it, because they put them in local jails, they take people from local streets, and so it's kind of a local fight for justice. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind as we move more toward community. These are the people in the community, are our friends, our neighbors, the people we are ultimately responsible for. And one of the programs that the Garden Alliance has recently established is the Advocacy Program, and we've got 2 advocates with us. And I'm going to let each of them explain how they understand the advocacy system and how it works for them. Which of you 2 would like to go first?
Well, you think you want to go ahead and go first? You seem to sum it up really well, and then I can play off of that.
Okay, yeah. Everybody hear me good?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Alrighty. Well, to me, advocacy is people with a common understanding of a situation coming together and hopefully to resolve the aforementioned situation. I like to use the analogy of a guardrail when commonly talking about advocacy. A guardrail it was designed by a civil engineer, and mind you, the civil engineer had the best interests in mind of creating a good guardrail. But when push comes to shove, he's just another person working a job like all of us, and he's ultimately just doing that to feed his family. My idea is by putting the correct people with the correct situation, you get better results. If someone who lost a family member to a guardrail was able to create a better guardrail, not only would they would have so much more passion and drive, but they would also be able to put to rest the person they lost. They would be able to ensure that no one else ever had to feel the sad feeling that they felt again. Therefore, transitioning the negative of someone losing their life into a positive of tons and tons of other people not having to fall frail to the same situation. And so to me, that kind of speaks to the advocacy in the way that anyone who's experienced an issue in life can find someone else who has experienced or is experiencing that issue and make sure that they never have to go it alone at the least, but hopefully not experience the same negativity that was experienced by the advocate.
I love that analogy. It's really great.
Thank you. I I like analogies. They help explain things and put things in frame of reference that we can't wrap our mind around, and that's another portion of advocacy. Is as astute or caring as a lawyer might be, they can't always have the life experience that's necessary to truly see the gravity of a situation, where an advocate can. And also, an advocate isn't necessarily just worried about the almighty dollar, whereas even in the best case scenarios, lawyers still have to worry about that.
So is the advocacy that you're involved in legal advocacy for legal troubles, or?
Yes.
I see. Huh?
Yeah. As well as being a support system. We basically, what can happen is an advocate can go into court with someone and help them with the issue. It's currently we would use the American with Disabilities Act. By the advocate is helping the person, technically is helping themselves pro se. So by them going to the American with Disability Act, they can say that for whatever reason they're not comfortable being their own legal counsel, and one of our advocates can step in, and our advocates in this case will have a better understanding of the legal system, having already gone through it themselves.
Has this been when you say the American Disabilities Act, that gives you as an advocate a special status in the courtroom? I guess I don't really.
Let me explain that a little bit, Ethan. So yes, it actually does. Back before 2008, the Supreme Court had pretty much gutted the protections Congress had tried to give to people who were disabled in helping them represent themselves in court. And then in 2008, the act was amended in such a way that just as a courthouse has to have a wheelchair ramp to accommodate disabilities, they have to provide sufficient help to accommodate disabilities. And no one is saying here that the disabilities don't have to be real, or that the American Disabilities Act does. A lot of people have problems which are probably disabling, and actually, I want to give a little bit of information to people who are interested in this. Karen Huffer has a website at equalaccessadvocates.com, and she has been a leader in the litigation abuse movement and in equal access to advocates. And in fact, there now is a certification given by the John Jay University of Criminal Law, and you can take it online, that allows you to come in and advocate on behalf of people who are disabled. And the way it works under our law is the state courts have to recognize this because Congress has enacted it, and so the state rules are preempted to the extent they disagree with this program and with what Congress has said. They have essentially said to judges, this is almost a ministerial task. You have to let these people in here. And as I understand it, those people who have been able to obtain advocates under the Disability Act have done fairly well in settling their cases. The law is pretty strong, and there's not been a lot of appellate law. It will be interesting to see what happens. And there are other avenues by which I believe people can represent one another. One way would be to the extent they are all members of a similar spiritual community, or a church, or a synagogue, or a mosque. I mean, the way many state constitutions are written is that, and as the United States before it kept flipping on what the First Amendment means, the notion is that if you're engaging in a spiritual activity, the state government, under state constitutions, may have a limited right to infringe on those activities. The general rule and the rule in Washington State is that if you're exercising a religious or spiritual right, the government can only interfere with that if it has a compelling basis to do so. And even then, they can only interfere with it to the extent their interference has got to be the most narrowly tailored. Now, the reason, of course, we have lawyers, supposedly, is because they know the court rules and they can represent others in court and they know the law. Well, that may well be, but if you have others who are certified and know how to practice law, then it would seem that the constitutional parameters should take precedence over the practice of law constraint. Now, there are different arguments that can be made on both sides, but the fact that the federal government has chosen to preempt courts in this way would tend to indicate that a state constitution could do the same thing. So and I'm just going to say a few more words and then I'll keep quiet for a while. But what's going on today is, like in Washington, it's documented that 85% of the people can't afford lawyers. So most people have to appear pro se. So a system of justice that is based on two-party advocacy doesn't work if only one side has an advocate. In fact, at that point becomes a system of injustice, because the way the system is supposed to work is the judge is supposed to sit up there and listen to the two sides and then pick which of the two sides based on the presentations they've made. Well, if you've got one side that doesn't have an advocate and doesn't know what to say, you can get a wrong result. I mean, the judge isn't even necessarily following the law.
Right.
And obviously that's not a system that's going to wind up being a just one.
Well, especially if you've got a system where the actual adversary is the state itself. But just a real quick question, is the certification that you're talking about for the advocate, is that a certification that is associated with the bar at all?
No, but it's coming from, in Huffer's case, it's coming from the John Jay School of Law, which is a pretty well-recognized school of law based on a book called Unlocking Justice and a course and testing and stuff. And so it would, I think, be very hard for a court to argue a whole lot if they're dealing with a disabled person that and in an area of disability. I don't think I think a court would be hesitant to overstep the will of Congress. And so, and let me go on and complete the thought. So one type of advocacy is already going on, and that's people are getting help from other people who know the law, whether they're a lawyer or not. Because most people can't afford to pay like $600 an hour for what it costs for a lawyer in Seattle, or even $300 per hour for what it costs out here in the rural communities. So what advocates can do is, like one of our advocates who's a friend of Kyle's, a friend of Ethan, Kyle, has had a situation where he's got a 4-year-old daughter, and the mother became addicted to stuff, and he wanted to get custody. And so he said, and it's very hard for a man to get custody, full custody in some cases. And so he had to deal with the court system and the CPS, and I think there's something called FARR out here. And so he went through that process, and it's a very scary process. And now he can help others go through it. It doesn't make sense, really, for somebody like me to try to learn the ins and outs of CPS when someone like him already has been to court and can help this guy prepare to represent himself pro se, because he knows the system. And, so the idea of advocacy is people on a local level helping other people on a local level in court, but also in legislative matters, social matters. It's people helping people to take back their community and forget the trickle down. We don't want your trickle down droplets. We want to create our own community with its power and network with other powers, so we're like a garden growing upward. Now, David, what tell us your take on all this?
Well, my take for the advocacy is that it's a step in the right direction towards giving the power back to the people. Like you were stating, we have a system that's set up where if you don't have the money to defend yourself or to be able to seek justice, then you are totally left out in the cold. We see hundreds of thousands of people over the years that have been basically ripped off or screwed over because they were unable to defend themselves in court with proper defense or to be able to afford proper attorneys. Like we see the issues with the public defenders where they're just paid to represent a massive group amount of people. And while many of those folks are in it for the genuine effort to truly help individuals out there, they get pummeled with so many different cases, and they're completely stacked where they kind of just end up having to half-effort a lot of those cases that end up going to trial, or they seek for the plea deals to be able to get around going to trial. And then we have other issues like we saw with one of our advocates who is fighting for the parental rights of the individual who would not be able to know as much about the law or have the financial backbone to afford a high-priced attorney. So what we are doing is essentially giving everyone back that ability to be able to have a proper legal defense, a group of advocates that are highly knowledgeable in the fields that they have experienced firsthand, being able to pass on that information at a much lower cost than could ever be achieved through a traditional lawyer or going through an agency.
Hey, David, is it possible or is it likely that more people don't understand these issues because either number one, they don't experience themselves, or is it because the media keeps it quiet for a long time? Or maybe both.
Well, it's a combination.
Right. That's what
Absolutely.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, it is definitely a combination of both, because most of the things that happen in the legal system are kept out of the eye of the public.
Right.
And it's by design. It's to keep the powerful powerful and the weak weak. So when you have a father that comes in and he has an issue with whatever it is, maybe it's a ticket of some general, and he's got no prior knowledge of this whatsoever. He's up against prosecutors or plaintiffs that are basically fully prepared, because this is what they do on a regular basis. It's like taking a minor league baseball team and throwing them straight into the major leagues and expecting them to be able to perform on the same level.
Right, so it's almost like to be in the game, to play in the game, you have to be in the game and to know the game. And it's
correct.
It's almost like a poker tournament where the one with the better hand is usually the one that wins, and that's drew to court.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that is Karen Huffer stresses is there's a litigation abuse syndrome. I mean, when people go into the courts and the judges just whack them around and take their houses. I mean, can you imagine? We've just gone through this thing where Wells Fargo has openly admitted that they've taken people's money, they've altered their accounts, and yet judges appear, and I mean, it was told to Congress a while back that all these mortgages were like fraudulent. And I mean, the courts just continually throw people out of their houses. And as we talked about earlier, anymore it's like 60 to 80 years old, they're going after you, and it's a genocide. I was reading just recently, as a result of a brief I was writing. I was going to include it in the introduction, but my client didn't want to go that far. But I was reading the Nuremberg trials, and there was a specific trial devoted to judges and lawyers. And it wasn't for crimes they had committed against non-Germans. It was for crimes that they committed against the German people for taking, their lives. It was a silent genocide, but they took their property as well. And in that case, they indicated that, yes, it was true that the Constitution had not changed, that the laws had not changed, the written wording of them, but the way they were interpreted had changed to such an extent that because war was going on at the same time, which war is continuing in America, and has been most, for virtually all its existence, they convicted them of the crime of plundering. And, when you read that German war trial, and this was done by the Americans, you see that it applies today. Over 30 million people have been evicted into the streets. I would imagine at least 6 million of them have died. I mean, and yet we allow our sheriffs and we allow our judges to continue to do this, and we shouldn't. I mean, we should, just like the German people should have, we should stand up. We shouldn't wait for foreign countries to come and rescue us. We, the people, should rescue ourselves because our government was designed for us to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Very true.
Well, I agree with that principle entirely. But you're right, people need to be more aware of it, and they should occupy their courthouses. And they should hold those judges and read those rulings and have those published just like you would a news story about, your local police department activity or your local council activity. And
you kind of wonder about the sheriffs that go out there and evict, and the sheriff's deputies. I mean,
right.
They're out there and they evict these people into the streets, whether they be on breathing machines, whether they be children. I mean,
right.
What kind of people are these?
And it's well within their purview to not do it. They're the highest authority in a county.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, you would think, but I mean, in Russia when they had the revolution, the soldiers refused to fire on their people. That doesn't happen in America. We've got a mercenary sheriff's department and police department. We are. I mean, this is certainly worse than George Orwell's 1984.
Well, we have some control. We have some control over that, though, because sheriffs are elected.
Well,
so, the people can really, really monitor the sheriff. Most people don't even know who their sheriff is.
Oh, that's so true. That is so true.
And the sheriffs seem to. We've got one in Snohomish County that I'm kind of looking at now because he does not seem to want to even investigate laws regarding land title. He seems to be completely fine with people disobeying laws that he doesn't want to enforce, and that the banks are benefited by that. It's really problematic. And so advocacy is not just a legal phenomenon. It's a way of people looking at their neighbor and helping their neighbor and helping themselves and helping the community to be passionate about the community and the protection of the community and the people from institutions like banks that rip us off. I mean, and there is no dispute about that anymore.
But you have to connect the dots, because you're right. If the bank is trying to take this, whether it's a secured loan like a mortgage or an unsecured loan like a credit card debt, and that some court, lower court especially, orders the sheriff, that they have an order of a confiscation or detainment or whatever, and the sheriff goes to execute that order with on the word of a judge who has listened to evidence that is weak and marginal and perhaps fraudulent. And so now the sheriff is being put in a position of facilitating another crime. And all of that just gets swept away because nobody understands what's going on, nor do they understand what their rights are or what the responsibility of that sheriff is.
Well, and when you
half of them don't even have their oaths filed.
When you look at it in the context of the Nuremberg trials, I mean, the purpose of those trials was to make clear to officials, public officials, that you can't just run roughshod over the rights of the people. I mean, their basic rights to that government officials have to respect. You can't do acts that result in genocide. Yet that's exactly what's going on.
Right.
Millions of people have been exterminated by the sheriffs and by the judges. And you know, the United States, you know, it's funny, we pulled off the Nuremberg trials and tried to hold Germany responsible for everything, and yet we won't even sign on to the World Court for fear that our officials will be held responsible. You know, the rest of the world knows what's going on here, and yet the people in our communities don't. And I'm going to toss it over to Ethan and let him talk for a while here on on some of that.
Ethan, before you talk, it's Doc G. I got a question, well, a comment more than like that from Facebook Live, because we're on Facebook Live tonight. And I want to give a shout out to Diane Hoffman. She's watching. She says, I'm sure in special circumstances they make arrangements for people on disability and children. That's what she's saying. She said you just can't throw them out in the street. I would hope they have some level of duty and compassion. Now, is she completely wrong? Because I'm getting the gist that she's completely wrong.
I know that there was the Barton family here. The guy was on a ventilator, and there were a lot of folks that showed up, and at first the sheriff refused to actually carry through the foreclosure, but then went ahead with it. And from my understanding is, no, they do put them out in the street. We had a client by the name of Linda, it's been a while, but she was in the hospital dying of stage 4 cancer.
Oh,
and the sheriff came in and put all of her stuff on in her yard. And
yeah, we've had that happen here.
Oh, that's horrible. That's just, I mean, see, these are the stories.
It's just unbelievable.
It is. It's a genocide, and it's being committed by our local officials, the ones we should have control of, to help some federal banks. I mean, what are we letting happen in this country? We are no better than the people that watched the Nazis exterminate people. I mean, we're not.
Well, I agree with that 100%. So evil prevails when good men do nothing, and people are absolutely unengaged, disengaged, disinterested, not even sympathetic anymore. It's bizarre.
Right.
Well, the real problem is with the judges and the sheriffs. I mean, they're not following law. How can they not know? I mean, anybody who reads a newspaper, and the newspapers are rigged in favor of the banks, but anybody who reads anything knows about the fraud that's going on, and the court doesn't care. They just accept the fraud. I mean, it's unthinkable, it's unimaginable, and it's intolerable.
Well, but the judges are the ones that fly. Here they are the worst culprits, but they fly under the radar. And that's because we, the people, allow it. Now, we just had on our ballot a whole host of judges. Do we want them reappointed or not? And half of those names, most of the voters have never even heard of. They have no idea how those judges are ruling in cases, how they're conducting themselves, because they fly under the radar. Who allows that? We do.
Exactly. So, Ethan or David, we're, as you can see, the hosts are pretty passionate too. What are your thoughts?
You can go ahead. I'll let you go. All right. Yeah, I think that anytime somebody becomes looks the other way, they're complicit. Like it happened in Germany. It happens all over the world. People look the other way and they think, "Oh, it's not happening to me." But if everybody else is gone, then who's going to be there to protect you? So you have to be there to protect others. That's just the way the world works, or the way the world should work. Pass it back to David.
Yeah, there is a huge complacency problem in our society where I like to talk about people walking with basically their head in the sand, like the ostrich. They basically go through life and they're not acknowledging what's really going on around them. And that's part of the reason why we're having so much trouble as we do today. Like, for example, today I wrote an article on libertychronicle.net about how 209 million people, whether they were able to vote or not, whether they have age or not, but 209 people in the population of the United States of America did not vote in this election. We had a 34% overall population vote and decide the future of our country. So that gives you an idea to put in perspective
That's staggering.
what kind of situation we have. Absolutely. This is something that has to change. We need a global awakening at this point, and I think it's starting to happen regardless. But in general, the American population has to be aware of what's going on around them. Stop worrying about the medial things that are in life and start putting in perspective that if they really want a secure future, they're going to have to pay attention and they're going to have to act, whether they want to or not, because eventually it will come to their doorstep and they won't have a choice when that happens.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't know what it takes. I've been writing about everything under the sun for 23 years now, just trying to inform and light a fire. And I can honestly say after 23 years, I haven't moved the dial even a little bit. And
Well, I'm thinking perhaps the millennials will do something. I mean, they're kind of inheriting a world that is broken, and what normally happens when something is as broken as this is it gets fixed. And that's why I think we're seeing this spiritual synchronicity. I think we're seeing good turning to the evil about us and saying, we're not going to tolerate this anymore. Kathy, did you see the video that we sent you? And folks out there, you can watch it by going to gardenalliance.org. And it's a video of our advocates kind of coming out and talking about the advocacy program and the Garden Alliance, which is kind of an alliance of organizations that have come together to help their local communities take back their local communities, to say to the people that want to be over them, hey, no, you got to stop. And it's to network with other communities that want to do that, so that what you're doing is it's your streets you're protecting, and you're protecting it for your community. And you don't care whether it's somebody claiming to be on high and coming from the empire. We've had enough of the empire. We want to take back our communities in the method that our Constitution provides.
well, and I think that's what it needs a little bit of clarification in terms of what advocacy, defining advocacy, and what the parameters of what you are able to help with. Because there's, advocacy is a big word. It's a big thing.
It is.
You know what I mean?
Well, the word advocate is a big thing, but, basically it's got a definition. And I think the dictionary definition is someone who makes a point for another. And the advocate, it's not just in courts of law. It's in the
Okay, that's what's important to know.
Yes, no, the advocacy, like, for example, Ethan has kind of an advocacy going on much like Mark Lovejoy did. You'll remember Mark Lovejoy studied to be a banker and actually became a farmer. And
right.
And we talked about intellectual property. So one of Ethan's advocacies has to do with intellectual property. Ethan, why don't you explain?
Alrighty. I like to advocate for products because there's no system in place today to let consumers know what is a better product. Nobody knows. I've been in the electronics industry for 15 years now, and I know every single person that walks through my door has it knows exactly what they want, and 9 times out of 10, what they want doesn't do what they would like to do. It's there's this fallacy that that people just think magic happens, and it's due to the fact that these electronics are being sold in a way that aren't becoming of their hardware capabilities. People are being lied to. They're being told in the stores that oh yeah, your iPod will connect to your toaster, and that's a generalization, but people are being told these things, and I know that from working firsthand, having to work out the issues at the sales counter or the repair counter. Like, no, that won't happen. I'm sorry, a sales associate told you that, but and it's not their fault. It's not the sales associate's fault. It's the fact that these products are coming out being marketed in a manner that is unbecoming of what the companies are capable of producing. And there's so many good products that don't even see the light of day due to the fact that they're over encumbered by their research and development costs, or another company buys up their product and makes sure it never sees the light of day because it could have ill-affected one of their other intellectual properties. The list goes on in ways that having no understanding of what a good product is equates to a bad life. And a lot of people equate a good product to the most costly, the most expensive product, and as a lot of people know anymore, that's not it. It's flashy marketing. It's a really colorful box and a product that lasts all of but 20 minutes, just like the thrill from the color of the box. And I think a lot of people are moving back towards mom and pop sort of stores, or like buying locally, because they realize that I would like to buy from someone that uses this product every day, someone that isn't just selling me something on a shelf. And I feel that that's really important, and that's something that I call it looking for an upstream bug in programming. If I'm able to resolve an issue that can resolve 10 other issues, then by all means, I'm going to resolve that one issue and fix it upstream, and then it resolves it for everybody downstream. And I feel that advocating for products can benefit so many other aspects of our advocacy program.
So, give me, is it products that you already know of or work with, or do you mean like inventors that come in? It's a fascinating advocacy. I'm just not sure how it works.
Essentially, advocating for a product is I'm beginning by I would like to create a group or that actually defines what good electronics are. What is the best implied use? There's no standard. There's a couple standards in electronics, but those standards are held by companies that typically hold back the flow of technology. Ricoh is a company that controls USB, and currently USB 3 is widely used, but still not heavily implemented. And USB 3 has been out for coming on 15 years now.
And aren't there a lot of better products out there that
most definitely. USB-C is a current one where you don't have to reverse it. Everybody's had to flip their USB port and knows how frustrating that can be. It always happens the third time, and there's only two sides.
Right, you're right.
Drives me crazy. But USB-C, which I'm sure
I forgot how interested you are on this stuff. Yeah.
The USB-C, it goes in both ways. You don't have to worry which way you flip it. And that, I'm sure they came out with that the next day after they invented USB 3. But that's because these groups are there to extend the life of these products so that they can squeeze as much money as they'd like out of these intellectual properties. Right. And so, really, in order to advocate for a product, we have to take the fight to intellectual properties, as well as creating groups that actually create tailor-made information that can be replicated, that gives people an understanding of what an electronics implied use is, rather than just telling them that it'll solve all of their problems and make them find true love.
Did you guys know that there's still Windows XP computers out there that people are still using today?
Did you know that actually most of your ATM machines, most of your ATM machines still use XP?
Yeah, I know
Microsoft,
that. I know
Microsoft actually extended security after the Service Pack 3 due to a request from the banks, because they weren't ready to give up and implement new ATM systems. And so Microsoft gave them 10 years to roll out new ATM systems. So you'll slowly start to see all of your ATMs change, and that's because they're finally giving up XP. Like,
yes, now see,
Wow.
I was told.
I still have a little XP that I still like the best.
Well, see, that's fine. But I was told. Now I don't know how true this is, but I was told about the banks. With the friend I have at the high level of the Pentagon has told me that some of the banks get kickbacks if they use the old software, and if people's accounts are identity theft or whatever or stolen, they still get a kickback, so it doesn't matter to them. They just don't.
Well, it's FDIC. It's federally insured at that point.
Right,
That's
right,
the person who
right,
stole the money is a federal criminal,
right,
and it falls on the FDIC.
Right. So they don't. So the banks themselves don't care because they make money either way from it. They
Oh,
have,
for heaven's sake!
when you have
it's true,
federal
it's
insurance,
true,
there's
Kathy.
no reason for good security. You hope you get stolen from. You go to sleep hoping somebody steals from you.
That's kind of funny. That's kind of funny.
Leave the
in a
door
way.
leave the door wide open and the key's in it.
I mean, that's really funny, but it's the truth. This is what we're trying to say. Everything
Well,
is.
and that's what happened with
What's not
Chase
funny is
taking
the
over
FDIC doesn't
Yahoo.
have any money.
Well, with Chase took over WAMU,
Right.
and WAMU is actually 4 banks. And when you look at the stuff closely, I mean, it's obvious that the servicers are now coming in claiming to have gotten these mortgages from the FDIC. But if you look at the paperwork that went along with the takeover, you'll find that the note had to be endorsed in a certain way. The endorsement had to be before 19, I forget exactly the date, but it was, I think, 2008 or 2010, and they're just not following it. And it's very clear that these mortgages were never insured, so they never would have gone through FDIC. It's all one big fraud that the legal cabals of America are pulling over
Right.
on the people. Then they can't be pulling it over on the judges. I mean, the judges have got to understand by now, because, I mean, we've got affidavits from the FDIC. I mean, it's very clear how this should work. And a second-year contract student should be able to understand what's going on.
Right.
And maybe it's because they're just listening to the bank. Maybe they're saying, well, the bank is telling me this and the other person's not represented, so I'm just going to ignore the law and take away the home, put the people in the street, and let them die.
That's pretty much what's been happening. So yeah, you're right on the money.
Seems like it, unfortunately. And that's why we've got advocacy. That's why we've got Garden Alliance. That's why we've got Church of the Gardens.
Right.
And that's why we are coming together to create better communities, because community by community, helping one another locally, we can create a better world. Globalism has failed, and so has nationalism in regard to the feds taking over and doing everything. And I don't think the people want it anymore. And there comes a point, where if our governors, are violating the Constitution, are they illegal or violating laws? I mean, we are supposedly a country of laws, and yet where everybody has to follow them. And what the empire is trying to tell us is we're a country where the law only applies to everybody but the 1% and those they say it doesn't apply to. I mean, this is a crazy time, and it's got to change, and you and I and everyone who's listening out there has got to be a part of this change. We can't continue to allow the atrocities to continue.
Well, as human beings, we can't. But Scott, here's the thing. We only have a certain reach. It's up to like what Kathy says we can do locally, but it's also what we can do globally. Today we're a global community, and what we can do globally is so much more than what we can do locally. And that's why I'm an advocate of not only the radio station like what I have, but also other radio stations that are trying to do the same thing. So, I think that we all should join hands and just work together and make this country better, and we can do it. I know we can. I got people from North Dakota trying to contact me. They want a show where they can talk about all this unrighteousness that are going over there right now with all the Sioux Indians and what they're trying to do with that pipeline. So I think that again, we can only do what we can do, but we can do so much more if we put our minds to it.
Absolutely.
Don't you guys agree?
Oh, yes.
Completely.
Kathy?
Well, I completely agree. I just think that the degree of engagement that needs to happen is, getting ever more critical. And I just don't know what's going to finally get people off the dime. I think that Scott is absolutely right, though. Unless we start really paying attention to what is happening at the court level, because really that is probably all the things. It's kind of like the microcosm or the perfect storm, if you will, of all the things that are wrong. It's wealth extraction. It's predatory. It's all the things that are really corrupted and really toxic in our communities, and it creates massive resentment, dangerous, hostility. You name it. It's really a great place to start to kind of revisit and renew what's going on, in this country, and try to start healing some stuff.
I want to say one last thing before I notice it's like 7:59. So I want to invite people to go to gardenalliance.org, and you can take a look at kind of the start of our advocacy program. Karen Huffer's been out there developing advocates. Law schools have been developing them. And, I mean, the time of letting the legal cabal run America is past. We need to turn on those folks because they represent everything that is pretty much evil and what's going on in our country today. I mean, if you see something you don't like, I think you can bet pretty much that the reason it's going on is because some legal cabal is pushing it. In fact, when you look at mortgages, you'll get a legal cabal like Davis Wright Tremaine, and they will claim that they represent the trust, the trustee, and the servicer, when it's all a lie. They may have a power of attorney, but my experience is half the time the power of attorney is not legal because it's not in an agency relationship with the trustee, meaning that the servicer gets to do what's best for the servicer, not what's best for the trust or the beneficiaries. It's all a big con game.
And it's turning a blind eye to the rule of law, at the simplest turn and at the complicated turns. It's just bizarre the way it's just completely ignored. And they get away with it because there's nobody really there to challenge it anymore. And because it used to be, at least from a moral level, the public outrage would be heard and they would be subject to it. Now there's not even a public outrage to deter them.
Right, and people don't understand that, it was the courts that caused the Civil War. With the Dred Scott decision. Lincoln criticized the type of system we live under. And you've got to, I mean, it was the courts that the Allies, the U.S., went the Nuremberg trials, pointing out that Germany had been in constant war, just like the United States has been, and that the government plundered from the people. Well, I mean, heck, 30 million people thrown out into the streets with millions dying is plundering, and
it absolutely is.
And they're giving it away, these homes, to these banks that everybody knows is crooks. I mean, what the hell is going on?
So I just have one last question. Where did you film that video? Because that mural on the back wall behind Ethan and everybody that got up and spoke is like awesome. I love it.
That is that was one of the synchronistic events. There's an artist by the name of Marvin Lilly, and he's got art all over the office, but he came in and he put that together, and there's actually more panels. And
right, but it's beautiful.
It's incredible. And doesn't it really give you the notion of a Garden Alliance?
Oh, yeah, it's kick-ass. I was just like, wow.
Yeah,
I just absolutely love it. So I had to say that.
Well, it's like you don't see it anywhere else. I'm looking right now at the Garden Alliance website, and if you go to that, you have to go down a little bit to see it. There's a request for donations at the top, which are needed. But then Ethan is the first guy, and then David is the second guy. And, I mean, and so it's a coming together in a time where we want leaders that are artists and philosophers. The time for lawyers and bankers being our leaders has come to an end. We need to kick them out. Unfortunately, we'll see how Trump does, but a lot of people don't have much faith. I would like to believe that he will grow into the office and that he will care about the people. But seeing what's being written about net neutrality and some of that other stuff.
Oh boy! Did you see where that? Did you see where that Tom Wheeler, who was appointed as the FCC chair, used to be a lobbyist for the provider industry, the media industry, Comcast, all the carriers. I just couldn't believe that when I found that out. I just thought it's just like the Monsanto VP being the director of food safety at the FDA. What the fish? I mean, the guy who was lobbying for the rules to benefit him is now making the rules to benefit.
That's exactly right.
It's just unreal to me. It's just unreal to me. Well, on a bummer of a note, when the fellow that we were trying to get not elected here in our county, who is a Wells Fargo CEO regionally here, and was responsible for undoing our ag preservation ordinance in favor of an industrial floating zone, won the election, so he will be a supervisor. So it has re-energized people to some degree because we know we have to be, uber vigilant now because we know he just stepped himself up. He wrote the plan to undo our ag preservation, and now he wants to usher in the players. And we just cannot allow this. And yet the Scott County voters just didn't pay one bit of attention because it was a general election and voted, he got in because he was on a strict,
Republican.
Where you hit it, you just mark the ballot for all Republicans. What do you call that? I forget. Anyway,
it's ticket voting.
Straight ticket, that's it. Straight ticket voting, and that's how I'm certain that he was able to win. But nobody bothered to just stop and take a look and recall what this man has done to our community. We have the finest soil in the world. And that just doesn't matter to this guy. And he's a farmer.
You know,
anyway,
well,
I'll keep you updated on all that.
Yeah, we're gonna end it soon, guys. I know.
All right.
Scott wants to go eat. We always hold him up for dinner.
Yeah, Scott's got to eat.
But even if I don't have to eat, I do have to go home. It's getting late out here, guys.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Listen to that.
It's like 8 o'clock here.
Yeah. What are you? What is it, poor Gino? It's midnight.
Well, yeah, it's a little after 11. Well, people on Facebook Live are enjoying the show. So,
good.
What I have to say is, I thank everybody for coming. Remember the two things, though. It's up to us to make the difference. Number one, and number two is, as long as we keep getting blocked by Facebook, Twitter, or social media accounts, we have to find other ways to get our message out there. And if radio is not the only way, let it be our voice. Let it be some other way. Share these videos, share these audios, share everything you can, not only about with what we do, but what everybody else does with each other, because that's the only way that we can find out what's going on. Email, whatever you got to do, just get it out there. That's all I can say.
And
all right, Carol. Well, thanks again.
This over, I think. We'll see what happens. I mean, we've also got to introduce ways because the net makes us a lot more vulnerable, because they can tinker with that and turn it off, and they can disconnect us from one another. And that's, again, why it makes sense to start to create local networks in communities where you can actually talk to one another. I mean, with your mouth.
Right.
So
well, Ethan, how come we don't have a substitute for the internet yet?
Substitute for the internet? We do. It's called Tor. It stands for The Onion Ring. The WW protocol that you're used to is actually owned by a company called ICANN. And even if you get rid of that WW, all the computers in the world are still connected. And you just have to use a different protocol. And one commonly used
that's
protocol.
what we need to figure out. One that Google can't control, or Facebook, or Twitter, Twatter.
There's always one person that's in charge of everything, and usually that person is connected to all these other domains, and I think everybody understands that, but. These companies all work together, and it's almost like renting a cell phone tower, and being Verizon and making money off the little guy as well as making money for yourself. So T-Mobile and all these Sprint and all these other people buy time from the tower, or they use it that way. So it's set up the same way. So all these things are set up that way. They make money on both ends. We just have to be aware of it and just realize that's all.
Well, I think we need to plug Ethan in and figure out a way to bypass all this and start something altogether new. And
I'm for that. Anybody want to make last comments before we shut down?
No, thank you very much for your time.
Yep, ditto.
You're welcome.
God bless everybody. Have a great Thanksgiving.
You too. Take care.
Yeah, you guys. Remember, family first. No matter what we do, family first. Think of other people, and we're having actually a homeless person over for Thanksgiving. I friended him, and he has no place to go. So we've always got a seat at the table for somebody else that's not doing well, and we're going to share our dinner with them. I advise everybody else, if you know somebody, or go down to the local food center and at least donate a turkey or something. Show that you care. It means a lot at the end, and if we all do that, maybe we can make a difference. Thank you all.
Amen.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Have a great night, great weekend, and a great Thanksgiving. God bless. Bye-bye.
God bless.